Working the midnight shift at a motel might sound uneventful to some, but for me, it became a nightmare I'll never forget. What happened during those nights has haunted me ever since. Let me tell you what I experienced while working at the Ridgeway Motel. Hi, my name is Winston and I work in Ridgeway Motel. Ridgeway Motel wasn't anything special. A small, run-down establishment on the outskirts of a quiet town. It mostly catered to travelers passing through or the occasional trucker needing a place to crash. The shifts were easy. I'd check guests in, keep an eye on the front desk, and maybe do a little cleaning if things got slow. But the real appeal of the job was the solitude. It's funny how that's the very thing I'd come to dread. It all started one Tuesday night, around 11 p.m. I was settling into my usual routine. The lobby was dimly lit, with the soft hum of the vending machine and the flicker of the old fluorescent lights keeping me company. The parking lot was empty except for a single car parked near room 6. The guest had checked in earlier that evening, a middle-aged man with a worn-out suitcase and a tired expression. Nothing about him stood out, so I didn't care much and continued my daily routine. By midnight, things got quiet. I was sipping my coffee and scrolling through my phone when I heard the faint ding of the lobby bell. Surprised, I looked up. No one was there. I assumed it must have been my imagination or maybe the wind rattling the old doors. But when it happened again, just 5 minutes later, I started to feel uneasy. I stepped around the desk and scanned the lobby. It was empty. Feeling uneasy, I went ahead and checked the security cameras. The grainy feed showed the parking lot, the hallways, and the front entrance. Nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Around 1 hour past midnight, I decided to do a quick walkthrough of the property to ease my nerves. The hallways were dimly lit, the kind of lighting that made shadows seem alive. As I passed room 6, I thought I heard a faint noise, like a low hum or whispering. I paused, pressing my ear to the door. Nothing. But as I turned to head back to the lobby, I saw something at the far end of the hall. A shadow. It moved, just barely, disappearing around the corner. "Hello!" I called out, my voice echoing slightly through the hallway. However, there was no response. I slowly walked toward where I'd seen the shadow. My heart was pounding with each step. The hallway ended at a locked utility closet. No one was there. I convinced myself it was just my tired eyes playing tricks on me and proceeded to return to my desk. At around 2:30 a.m., the phone at the front desk suddenly rang. It startled me because calls at that hour were rare. I answered with the usual greeting, "Ridgeway Motel, how can I help you?" A deep and strained man's voice responded, "Room 6. He's in room 6. "Excuse me?" I asked, confused about what he meant by what he just said. The line went dead not long after. Chills immediately ran down my spine. I checked the guest log and realized room 6 was occupied by the man who had checked in earlier. I picked up the phone and tried to call the room, but it went straight to voicemail. My gut told me to check on that guy, but something held me back. I decided to wait and see if anything happens. At 3 a.m., the guest from room 6 came into the lobby. His face was pale, and his eyes looked sunken, as if he hadn't slept in weeks. He looked like a different person when he first checked into the room earlier. He placed his key on the counter and said, "I'm leaving now." I asked him if everything was okay, but he didn't answer. He just walked out, got into his car, and drove off into the night. I chalked it up to a bad experience or maybe personal issues, but when I looked at the room key, I noticed something strange. It was wet, as if it had been submerged in water. Curiosity got the better of me. I decided to check room 6. I grabbed the spare key and made my way down the hall. For some reason, the air felt colder as I approached the door that night. When I opened it, the first thing I noticed was the smell. A damp, musty odor that reminded me of stagnant water. The room was in disarray. The bed was unmade, the curtains were drawn tightly shut, and the bathroom door was slightly ajar. As I stepped inside, I noticed wet footprints leading from the bathroom to the bed. My stomach churned. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" Nothing but silence. I then tried to push open the bathroom door and froze. The bathtub was filled to the brim with murky water. Floating in it was a single waterlogged shoe. Shaken, I quickly returned to the lobby and checked the security cameras again. This time, I rewound the footage to when the man left his room. My hands trembled as I watched. The grainy video showed him leaving the room, but something was off. As he walked down the hallway, a shadowy figure followed him, staying just out of reach of the light. It wasn't human, its movements were jerky and unnatural. I fast-forwarded to when he entered the lobby. The figure didn't follow him inside. Instead, it lingered in the hallway, standing perfectly still outside room 6. After what I saw that night, I didn't sleep the next day. When my next shift started, I was on edge, terrified. Every noise, every flicker of the lights made my heart race. By midnight, I was questioning whether I should quit this job and get the hell out of this place. That's when I hear the phone rang. Again. Room 6, the voice said, harsher this time. He's still in there. I quickly slammed the phone down, grabbed my trusty little flashlight, and marched to the room. I wasn't going to let my imagination get the better of me. When I opened the door, the room was completely empty. The footprints were gone, the air no longer cold, and the bathtub was dry. I felt a mix of relief and confusion as I turned to leave. That's when I saw it. In the reflection of the bathroom mirror, a tall, dark with hollow eyes figure stood behind me, looking at me straight in the eyes. I immediately spun my head around to look, but there was nothing there. The room was just empty. I quit the job the next day. I couldn't stay another night in that place. I told my manager what happened, but he just laughed it off like it was a silly joke of mine, saying I must have been overworked. A few weeks later, I heard that Ridgeway Motel had closed down from the news. Apparently, a guest had gone missing. The police found no trace of him except for his waterlogged shoes, left neatly by the side of the bed in room 6. To this day, I can't explain what I saw or heard. I'm just glad that I made the decision to leave that place. But I'll never forget the feeling of being watched, the cold air, and the voice on the other end of the line, warning me about room 6. I definitely know what I saw. Some of the scariest things in life don't come from stories or movies. They happen in places you least expect, in situations that seem ordinary until they take a sinister turn. This is a true story that makes me question how much we truly know about the places we call home. I was in my late 20s when I found the perfect house, or so I thought it was. It was a charming rental property tucked away on a quiet street in the suburbs. It is lined with old oak trees, their branches forming a canopy that made the street feel secluded. The house itself was nothing remarkable, a modest 2-bedroom with a small yard and a porch swing. But for me, it was perfect. I recently moved to the area for work and needed a place that was affordable and close to my new office. The landlord, Mr. Grayson, seemed eager to rent it out. He'd barely given me a tour before handing over the keys, but I didn't mind at that time. I was just too excited to start this new chapter of my life. Little did I know later that the house had a history, one that Mr. Grayson conveniently left out. The first few weeks of my life went smoothly. I settled into my daily routine, enjoying the quiet evenings on the porch with a glass of wine and my favorite book. But things started to change one night when I was unpacking boxes in the basement. The basement was unfinished, with concrete floors and exposed pipes. I remember when I was arranging some old photo albums on a shelf, I noticed that there was a small wooden door in the corner. It was oddly placed, almost hidden behind a stack of bricks, like it doesn't want anybody to know it's there. Curiosity got the best of me. My smartass tried to open it, but that creepy wooden door just wouldn't budge. It was locked so tightly, and there wasn't any key nearby at that time, so there's no way my petite body was going to open that. I gave up eventually and decided it was probably just an old crawl space and didn't really think much of it. Later that very night, as I was falling asleep, I heard a faint, tapping sound coming from below. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but the tapping grew louder and more deliberate. It sounded like it was coming from that basement. The next morning, I casually went down to the basement to investigate on what caused that. The door was untouched and locked. Everything seemed undisturbed. I told myself that I must have been too tired last night. Oh boy, was I wrong. The tapping continued the following night. It was always that faint but consistent tap, like someone is gently knocking on it. Determined to get to the bottom of it, I decided to call Mr. Grayson to ask about that door. He seemed oddly dismissive, saying that's just an old storage space. Nothing to worry about. But when I pressed him further, he quickly changed the subject. His evasiveness only made her more suspicious. I was quite furious, as I could not get any decent sleep every night since the tapping sound started. A few days later, while I was out for a walk, my neighbor waved from afar and quickly approached me. Her name was Mrs. Klein, and she lives nearby. After some small talk with her, Mrs. Klein lowered her voice and asked me, "You're renting the old Grayson house, aren't you?" I nodded, and Mrs. Klein's expression grew serious. "Be careful," she said. "That house you're living in, it's seen things. People don't stay there long." I asked what she meant by that. Mrs. Klein just shook her head and walked away. Her cryptic warning left me feeling more uneasy, but she tried to brush it off. That conversation did not end well. Days went by, the tapping grew louder and louder. This time, it was accompanied by a faint scraping sound. My heart raced so hard as I lay in my bed at that moment. I covered myself with a blanket and with my phone holding tightly on my hand. I debated whether to call the police, but decided against it. What would I even tell them? I thought maybe it was just a small animal that decided to make their home there. After God knows how many frightening and sleepless nights, I decided that it was time to take matters into my own hands. I borrowed a crowbar from my coworker, prepared to head down the basement. With a deep breath, I pried that wooden door open. It took me quite some time, but eventually I successfully swung open that wooden door. And in there was a dark, narrow passageway. I could not believe my eyes. This was under the house all along? The air inside was super cold and damp. The walls were lined with rotting wood. I hesitated before my dumbass trying to step inside. I swear to God, I'm not sure where did my courage came from at that time. Perhaps I just wanted to clear things once and for all. Using my phone's flashlight to guide me, I went down the passage, led me to a small room. It was no bigger than a walk-in closet. In the center of the room was a single wooden chair. Scraps of paper and really old photographs were just scattered all over the floor. I was so terrified I nearly peed myself on the spot. I then picked up one of the photographs, trying to take a closer look. The picture showed a family photo. A man, a woman, and 2 children. But the weird thing is, their faces had been scratched out with something sharp. I quickly picked up the other photographs on the floor and realized that were all the same, all with their faces defaced. I stood there, frozen. Suddenly, I felt a rush of cold air, as if someone had brushed past me. I immediately bolted up through that creepy hallway and up the stairs. My phone's flashlight flickered for some reason. I just felt that something was behind me, like it was trying to keep me down here for good. Luckily, nothing happened to me down there. The wooden door was also shut for good. After that dumb exploring idea of mine that day, the activity in the house seemed to intensify. I couldn't explain, it felt weird. I can always hear footsteps on the hallway echoing through the gap of the bedroom door. Doors would creak open and slam shut on their own. My belongings were moved or went missing, only to reappear in odd places. Sometimes I even woke up to find scratches on my bedroom door, as if something had been clawing at it. Mind you that I was living by myself, or was I? I've had enough, and desperate for answers, I reached out to a local historian who specialized in the area. What I discovered that day left me shaken. That house I've stayed in had been built in the 1920s by a man named Samuel Grayson. Grayson? He was rumored to be abusive and controlling, and after his wife and children disappeared under mysterious circumstances, nobody knows why, he lived there alone until his death. The basement door had been installed later, and no one knew why. It was then I decided I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I began packing all my things, planning to leave by the weekend. But on my last night there, the house seemed to come alive. The tapping, footsteps, and whispers all blended into a cacophony of noise that left me paralyzed with fear. My bedroom door would swung open violently. I can sometimes see a shadowy figure, tall and menacing, standing in the kitchen. I couldn't make out its features, but its presence was suffocating. It's something I've only seen in the movies. Since then, I decided to move out to my best friend's house and swear to never step foot in that area again. Thankfully, I'm living in a cozy apartment now, without any paranormal activities around me anymore. What do you think? Are these paranormal activities genuinely happening? Or could they just be tricks of our mind?